Let it be me. Let it be me. When the theme for this event was first suggested, it triggered a memory. It was a vague memory, but something really significant. And it had to do with a song. There was definitely a song there, but I couldn't quite place what it was. After a while, though, I was doing something completely banal, like washing the dishes, and it hit me. The Indigo Girls song, Let It Be Me. So I looked it up on the playlist and played it. When it came to these lyrics, if the world is night, shine my life like a light. Tears welled up in my eyes, and that vivid memory that had eluded me earlier just filled my mind. I was a new and eager teacher, and my director had sent me on a retreat for teachers. This was no ordinary conference for teachers. We didn't share discipline, techniques, or lesson plans. David Mallory asked us to reflect and share with each other what it meant on a deeply personal level to devote one's life to teaching. The point was to retain bright teachers in the field, but it did so in a really interesting way. David invited us to explore in our minds what it would look like to leave teaching for a more lucrative profession. Now, I was a Latin teacher, so it wasn't like I was really worried about whether or not to accept that big position at Microsoft. The real angst that I was experiencing was this. If a new teacher with only a few years' experience decided to take time off to raise a family, what were her prospects on returning to the field? David responded to the emotion in my voice, and he encouraged me. He assured me that there was great value in the work of raising a family, and he was confident that whatever I chose to do, I would create the future that I wanted for myself. The week after the conference, I received an email from David. He was notorious for making personal connections with countless teachers, thousands of them. But he did this in this really sincere way of making you feel like you were truly the most special person he'd ever met. And so he wrote to me that he was sure I would find my path and be successful, and that no matter what, he saw in me a light that would shine in others' lives. It instantly reminded me of the song, because things came much more quickly in my 20s. And I was touched, I was inspired, but then I was daunted by this task. I had to find this great calling, this purpose that would allow me to change the world. And don't we all want to feel loved and accepted and important in the people's lives that are close to us, but also to feel like our lives contribute something to a greater community. So a few years after this conference, I had the first of my 3 children, and I decided to make the change and stay home, become a stay-at-home mom. And I made the decision without regret. And my purpose was raising these 3 tremendous, important little lives. But 10 years later, the kids were all in school, and I started to feel like something was missing. It wasn't that I didn't feel this was worthwhile work, and it wasn't necessarily a career I was looking for. It was just that old calling, that sense that I needed a greater purpose, that I was meant to do something more. At the same time, I lost someone very close to me to cancer, my sister-in-law, Jenny. Jenny was someone who I always admired for shining her life like a light in ways great and small at every opportunity. And I felt keenly that sense of the fragility of life and that urgency to find that purpose. What was my purpose? It was right at this moment that I received an email from a woman in Cambodia. You know, in the realm of logic and reason, our lives should never have crossed. But like the synchronistic moment in the hero's journey, they did cross. Namoy grew up in Cambodia. She was born to poor and illiterate parents. But her country offered free books. She loved books. She loved them because they offered her a promise of a life beyond her horizons. And she excelled at school. And in 1972, she won a scholarship to study in France. This is an incredible opportunity to study French literature at a university in France. And while she was getting her degree, she met another Cambodian scholarship student named Ken Yu. He was studying architecture. They fell in love and they got married. And when they were through with their studies, they wanted to return home to begin their lives as a married couple surrounded by their own families. So they applied to the newly established Khmer Rouge Authority for visas to return. They had heard some rumors about some evacuations and some violence in connection with the communist coup, but they really had no inkling of the tragedy that was about to unfold in their country. So they waited for the visas to come and the call to go to Paris to fly home. But it took a while, and when the call came, it turned out that Moy was pregnant with her first child. So So they hesitated, and they made the decision to postpone the trip. That decision saved their lives. All the other Cambodian students who had been abroad returned home to perish at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. The best and the brightest, the future doctors, intellects, scientists, educators, artists, either died a slow death in the work camps or a violent death from torture and execution. Nearly 2 million people died. Now, 2 million people out of a population of only 7 million is a stunning enough statistic, but consider this. Only 7,000 of 20,000 teachers survived. Only 10% of doctors were spared. Political and cultural institutions, including schools, were destroyed. Books were burned. The entire country was brought to ruin. While their country suffered one of the worst genocides in history, Moi and Kin sought refuge in Africa. Moi taught French, and Kin worked as an architect, first in the Sudan and later in the Ivory Coast. They had 4 beautiful children, and they made several attempts to return to Cambodia, but they just couldn't provide the education or the life that they wanted for their children there, and so they eventually settled in Qatar. But the memory of their homeland endured. So when their 4 children were grown, Moi and Kin returned to their country. They found, even 30 years after the war, a country mired in poverty and an utter dearth of educational opportunity. One of the few trained artists to have survived the Khmer Rouge, Kin set himself upon the task of reviving the country's artistic heritage. He painted day and night, producing hauntingly beautiful pictures of his people, especially women, and their experience of the genocide. It was education that had given them an opportunity for life and a better life. And so it was education that Moi wanted to give as a gift to her people. So she created a Montessori school, a place where she could begin anew with the youngest of children to restore the professional and artistic and intellectual class that had been decimated by the Khmer Rouge. The name she chose for her country, Siamatre, combines 3 words that embody the future she envisions for her country. One that comes to terms with the fear and barbarism and hatred of the past and replaces them with freedom, civilization, and love. Now, into this picture, in what would become a pattern of synchronicities, stepped Pierrette Van Cleve, a San Diego art dealer who was passionate about the power of art to teach, to heal, even to raise a third world country out of the bonds of poverty. And she had traveled extensively in Asia, but she'd never been to Cambodia. In 2009, however, she was mysteriously compelled to go there, and she arrived a day before an exhibition of Kin's work was to open. She happened to be in a cafe, saw an advertisement, and decided to go. She was instantly drawn to Kin's work and recognized his talent. And she also found out that she had something in common with Moi, for Pierrette had attended one of the very first Montessori schools ever opened in the United States. So the 3 of them became fast friends. Not long after this, though, Kin was diagnosed with lung cancer. Pierrette had continued her travels in Asia, and she happened to be in Bangkok at the same time that Kin was sent there for treatment, and so she visited him in the hospital. And just 2 days before he died, she received his last wishes. Kin implored her to preserve his paintings and to make sure that they would serve as witnesses for the atrocities suffered by his people and for their capacity for survival. Pierrette committed to do this, in essence, to keep alive the light that had been Kin's life. Moi was devastated by the loss of her husband, but she was resolved to continue on with her vision. She worked tirelessly to come up with creative ways to fund her school. She converted their home into a guest house. She started a creperie, and she produces homemade jams, and they're packaged in these beautiful little jars and hand-woven baskets. So these enterprises help fund the school and allow her to accept children from all economic backgrounds. Not just to lift up the poor, but to prepare the upper class. Because Moi knows that in reality, it's the privileged ones who will end up in the positions of power. And she knows that they need an education rooted in equality and compassion and peace in order to be the leaders that will pull their country into the first world. So children pay, or parents pay on a sliding scale, and those too destitute to pay anything at all can barter goods or services. But every child is treated equally. In 2011, Moi traveled to Los Angeles to attend the exhibition of Kin's work put on by Pierrette. At the opening, in another moment of synchronicity, she met the assistant director of the Montessori Institute of San Diego. who generously offered Moy a scholarship to send one of her teachers here to do a year-long Montessori training. Now, this was an amazing opportunity since no Montessori training facilities exist in Cambodia. And to have a formally trained teacher would be a great boon to her school. So she returned to Cambodia with just the teacher in mind, but no real plan on how to afford the room and board in La Jolla for a year. It was just at this moment that she reached across the ocean to me. She searched the internet, looking for Montessori schools, hoping to find a parent who would host a teacher in exchange for childcare. To Moy, it was just a stab in the dark. But to me, it was that calling that I'd been waiting for. So I called and emailed every Montessori school I could think of, but didn't have quite any luck at first. Sreymom was the young girl that she had chosen to do her training here, and she had grown up on a farm in rural Cambodia. She was the only girl in her family and expected to get married and work the land. But she, like Moy, loved books, and she loved learning, and she excelled at it, and she saw a better life for herself. And she insisted on continuing her education, even after her father died and her family could no longer afford the schooling. It was the generosity of the community that allowed her to continue and get her degree, from her sister-in-law who offered her savings, to the charity that gave her tuition funds, to the ferryman who let her cross the river on her bike to get to school when she didn't even have a single coin necessary to pay the fare. So with her degree, Moy was able to obtain a job teaching in Moy's school, and she is beloved by the students for her warmth and her patience and her joyful spirit. Mindful of the community that made her dream possible, she supports her widowed mother, and she also pays for one of her brothers to get his education. But her goal for herself is to continue her own education and share it with the children of Cambodia. Like Moy, to become a light and shine for the children of Cambodia. So when Moy offered her this opportunity to travel abroad to study, as daunting as it seemed, she was eager to take the challenge. If we could just find a family for her, she would arrive in the fall of 2012. I continued and continued and continued and reached out to everybody I could think of in La Jolla, but I still wasn't having any luck. All the while, though, I corresponded with Moy, and we became closer friends, and she shared with me just the joys and challenges of running a school. She sent pictures of the beautiful countryside of Cambodia, and she shared painful memories that haunt her, stories that reflect the emotions so vividly depicted in some of her husband's works. She had two sisters, and during the reign of the Khmer Rouge, Hang, the older one who was married, was allowed to stay in the village. Sroya, who was unwed, was sent to a labor camp. And one day a traveler came to Hang in the village and told her that her sister was starving in the camp and had requested that food be sent. Now at this point, food was scarce and people would resort to any kind of tactics, even for the littlest scrap, and so Hang was suspicious the traveler would just keep the food for herself, and she sent nothing. When she learned later that her sister had indeed died of starvation, she was racked with a guilt that she struggles with to this day. And it's experiences like this that Moy says are behind her determination to take every opportunity possible to do any kind of good in the world, whether or not there's a good chance for success. And it was this kind of story that made me even more determined to make sure Sreymom could get here. So I cast my net wider, made more phone calls, and eventually found a family not half a mile from our home, the Moores, great new friends at our wonderful new school. And in August, Pierrette and I welcomed Sreymom, like we said, joked, a newborn baby, and delivered her safely to the Moores where she began her studies. And here she is, working tirelessly, spending hours on her studies, every spare minute babysitting to earn extra money to send home. So, let it be me. If the world is night, shine my life like a light. It turns out David Mallory was right. I do have a light that shines for others. It may be just a flickering candle to the floodlights of lives of Moy's and Sreymom's, lives that have shone through the black night of genocide, the fog of poverty, and the shadow of fear and ignorance. But while my part has been a small one, I feel honored to have had the opportunity to say, yes, let it be me, to do something, even if it's just making a connection, like a circuit that allows the flow of electricity to power the big light. So even if what we do seems small, it is essential that we do it, whether it's shining for a short time or helping others to shine. So if the world is night, shine your life like a light, and recognize that it is likely you already do. Thank you.
Thank you,